Welcome back into the locker room. I'm your host, Will Kronsberg, joined this week by Connor Fisher to discuss a little bit of NFL draft. And Connor, I think this one really starts with some of the trades that we've seen. We saw the San Francisco 49ers move up to number 3. The Dolphins then moved back to number 12, but parlayed that into number 6 in a trade with the Eagles. So which trade do you think has been most impactful before we get to the draft?
Well, I think it might actually be the Jets shipping off Sam Darnold, because there's been a lot of conversation over the last few months, are the Jets going to go quarterback? Now that they got rid of Sam Darnold, it's the Zach Wilson show in New York. I really don't see why you would do that unless you're getting arguably, the second best quarterback with one of the highest ceilings in the class.
Well, Zach Wilson's definitely a high ceiling quarterback. The Jets were infatuated with his pro day, but we know Trevor Lawrence is locked in at number 1 for the Jaguars. And Zach Wilson may be locked in at number 2 now for the Jets. At number 3 with the 49ers, is that surely going to be Mac Jones, a guy like Justin Fields, or maybe it's not even a quarterback because they have Jimmy Garoppolo? How do you see the 49ers using that third pick?
I would honestly think they got to go quarterback. You don't make a move like that unless it's for a quarterback in this league. Is it going to be Mac Jones? No, I don't think so. I don't think he's got the high ceiling of a guy like Trey Lance or Justin Fields. He's not as athletic. He is accurate and has a beautiful deep ball. But they could have gotten him at number 12, most likely. So it's going to be either Trey Lance or Justin Fields. That's what I think.
Well, this draft class comes down to those quarterbacks. You mentioned Fields, Lance, and I mentioned Mac Jones. Of the big 5, who do you think really has the biggest pro career in front of them?
Well, I think it's Trevor Lawrence, obviously. I mean, that guy has been expected to be the number 1 overall pick since he was a high school recruit. And he's lived up to a lot of the hype. I'm not usually one to go with the hype. After all, everyone thought Jamarcus Russell was the next John Elway. But this guy has everything a team needs, especially a young team like Jacksonville.
But when you talk about these quarterbacks, you're looking at Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, and Trey Lance. And there's a lot of different styles in there. One of them, has been the best player in college football for 2.5 years. Another one of them fell under the radar and really only started 1 full season at the FCS level. So there's definitely some variability in this class, which leads to the infamous draft bust of this 5, who's not going to work out in the NFL.
It's probably going to be Trey Lance. Trey Lance has almost everything you could want. He's got the size, he's got the arm talent, he can run with the ball, he's durable. The problem is he's not that accurate. He struggles with accuracy against solid competition. He only played 1 game last season and completed a little over 50% of his passes. If you throw that guy into a starting NFL role immediately, he's got the highest chance, in my opinion, to flame out.
Lance definitely doesn't have the experience that you would typically look for. As I mentioned, he started just about a full season at North Dakota State. And we've seen good quarterbacks out of North Dakota State before. Obviously, Carson Wentz took the Eagles or put them on a Super Bowl trajectory before he got injured. Easton Stick, who was a backup with the Chargers for a couple years, and now Trey Lance. But I want to shift to some of these more under the radar or quarterbacks who aren't in that top 5 conversation. Looking at guys like Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond, or maybe even an Ian Book, who just took Notre Dame to one of their best seasons in decades. Who do you like as one of those under-the-radar quarterbacks?
I would definitely say Kellen Mond. Apparently he had a really good pro day, and a lot of NFL teams kind of turned around and started looking at him with more interest. He's an accurate, durable, veteran guy. I don't know if he has starting traits, but he can go in there and be a really solid backup for his entire career. And Davis Mills from Stanford is another guy who's really been rising up boards because of a strong pro day. Those are my 2 guys that could be dark horse 2nd or 3rd round picks.
Now, there's one guy that I want to highlight, and that's Kyle Trask. Obviously, one of the big marquee matchups in the middle of last college football season was Texas A&M versus Florida, Mond versus Trask. But Trask really put together a great season. In his 12 games, he completed almost 70% of his passes. He threw 43 touchdowns compared to just 8 interceptions. And I think that's really a strong showing for sort of a pro-style offense with Dan Mullen, a guy who's developed a couple pro quarterbacks. But part of his success was Kyle Pitts. At that hybrid tight end receiver position, he's another top prospect in this draft. Which other offensive skill players outside of the quarterback do you think will have a good impact in the top 10 or top 15 of the draft?
Well, for me, it's Jamar Chase, the wide receiver out of LSU. He didn't play this season, obviously because of COVID, he opted out, but he didn't have to. He had one of the most prolific seasons by a wide receiver of the last 2 decades, helping LSU win that national title. He's the kind of guy that you can put into almost any NFL offense, and he's going to excel. I just think, as a wide receiver, he's probably not going to go top 5, but I could see him going 6th overall to Miami.
Well, when you look at the back half of that top 10, they're going to have so many weapons to choose from. You mentioned Chase, who was the top receiver in 2019, led his team to a national championship. But I want to look at another receiver who led his team to 2 national championships, and that's, of course, Devontae Smith. Won the Heisman in 2020, the first receiver to win it in decades since Desmond Howard, and a guy who was at Alabama with the likes of Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, and Mac Jones. I really like him as a weapon on offense, a guy who can bring speed, and his teammate Jalen Waddle, who was really projected to be that number 1 receiver for them before he got injured. He's another guy. He gives you that downfield threat, and I think that if you look at one of those Alabama receivers, you're finally going to see some true potential coming out of that program, the likes of Julio Jones, somebody like that. But shifting over to the defensive side, we really haven't talked about any defenders. And that's because not a lot are projected to go near the top of the draft. But who do you like on the other side of the ball?
Well, I really like Notre Dame's linebacker, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's got that, that modern hybrid look. He's not that tall, but he's fast, he's strong, and he can play anywhere on that middle part of that football field and go from sideline to sideline and cover, which is really important for linebackers these days.
I think he's a really strong linebacker, and I commend you on the pronunciation of Owusu-Koramoah. I like 2 other pass rushers who I think could go in the back half of the first round. Zaven Collins out of Tulsa, a guy I got to see a couple times on TV, really strong at a mid-major program. And the other guy is Christian Barmore from Alabama. He continued to show up down the stretch as Alabama put together another great season. I would say LSU 2019, Alabama 2020. Those are 2 of the best football teams that we've seen in a long, long time. But if you look further back in the defense, a couple of defensive backs, J.C. Horn from right here, University of South Carolina, and Patrick Surtain from Alabama. Now, Horn is a guy who only had 1 interception during his time here at Carolina, but I think in the pro game, he can really flourish. He's projected to be in that 8 to 15 range in the draft, and I think he could be a really strong defender out on the perimeter. And Surtain, the same thing. Obviously, he's won a couple national championships, a little bit of a stronger pedigree, but I think they both kind of fit into that category. Now, one final question I want to throw you is about your Eagles. We know you're from Philadelphia, and the Eagles have been kind of back and forth. They won a Super Bowl a couple years ago, then last year they switched from Wentz to Hurts, and they're in a little bit of a transition period. So who do you think the Eagles can pick up this draft to help out Jalen Hurts in his first full pro season?
Well, with the 12th overall pick, they've got a chance to land arguably, the 2nd or 3rd best receiver in the class, depending on how everything shakes out. I think at 12, they're well within range for Jalen Waddle, who can take over that deep threat role that Deshaun Jackson just sort of got before he got hurt and ended up leaving for the Rams. But one position I do think that they really need to look at in this draft is linebacker. They have put basically no draft capital into that position, and they have paid for it time and time again. So going out and getting a linebacker, maybe Chaz Surratt in the 2nd round, would really help them get going.
I think if they pick up a linebacker or even one of those receivers that you mentioned, they could position themselves to win the NFC East. We saw it was a pretty open division in 2020. I'm expecting similar things in 2021. And that'll do it for us on this episode of The Locker Room. For Connor Fisher, I'm Will Kronsberg. Thank you so much for watching.